In this section, which is number 13, we're going to elaborate on the conditions of contract for carriage. Admittedly, not the most exciting subject in the world. In fact, when we look at the next slide, we will be font size challenged by the very small print that is found on the back of an Air Waybill that explains the conditions of contract for carriage. As boring and tedious as it is, there are certain components of the terms and conditions on the back of an Air Waybill that we have to bring forward. Let's do just that. Airlines subject the interpretation of their conditions of contract for carriage to a number of conventions. And in this context, the convention is an international treaty agreed to by multiple countries. Let's just run through their names fairly quickly. We'll make reference to them. We won't look directly at them. The first, one of the biggest, is the Convention for the Unification of Certain Rules Relating to International Carriage by Air, also known as the Warsaw Convention. We'll see reference made to the Warsaw Convention when we look at the actual back of an Air Waybill. The Warsaw Convention as amended in 1955. Again, the Warsaw Convention as amended at Montreal in 1975. And then another amendment at Montreal in 1975. The Warsaw Convention covers a lot of what, in essence, is limited liability proclamations being made by the carrier and its agents, meaning the freight forwarder. And then finally on this slide, also another convention for the unification of certain rules for international carriage by air, 1999. Obviously, some pretty exciting stuff. All of this, for purposes of our training, revolves around the limited liability statements being made by the air carriers and their agents, meaning, once again, the freight forwarders. We're going to do our best to zoom in on this document, but it's a little challenging from the get-go. Luckily, here's the good news, we're not going to go through the whole thing. But as an importer, and a freight forwarder, and a carrier for that matter, it's important to understand the rules of engagement. And while there are other subjects covered in the terms and conditions on the back of an Air Waybill, let's say it one more time. This is about limiting the liability of the carrier for theft, loss, or damage to goods. And as a quick spoiler alert, the news isn't good in terms of that limited liability for the importer whose goods are stolen, lost, or damaged. We're going to focus on the left-hand side of this document. Of course, any student is welcome to go and find an Air Waybill and read it till their heart's delight. We're going to stick to the left side of this document. The first points out something we've already said as it relates to the carrier and its agents. And we're looking at number 1 here. And let's start by looking at the opening sentence. Notice concerning carrier's limitation of liability. We'll kick off with number 1. In this contract, and the notices appearing hereon, carrier includes the air carrier issuing the Air Waybill and every carrier and agent who carries or undertakes to carry the cargo or perform any other service related so or incidental to such carriage. That's just a legalese kind of way of saying that the limited liability extends from the carrier, the actual airline, to its freight forwarders. So everybody's kind of washing their hands of any liability here. What is also important to point out is the unit of measure that's used to limit that liability, something that's referred to as a special drawing right. It's kind of a currency, actually, in this case for air freight liability. But here's the bottom line. The airlines and their agents limit their liability to roughly $20 per kilo. That's the key. It's not the value of the merchandise, it's the weight of the merchandise. And it comes out to about $20 a kilo. So the more valuable your cargo is, but the smaller your shipments are, the less money the U.S. importer is going to get should there be theft, loss, or damage to merchandise. That's really the bottom line here. We see in 2.2.1 that reference to the Warsaw Convention. Carriage is subject to the rules relating to liability established by the Warsaw Convention or the Montreal Convention. From there, it goes down to 2.2, 2.2.1, talks about applicable laws and government regulations. 2.2.2, provisions contained in the Air Waybill, carrier's condition of carriage and related rules. 2.2.2.1 is a very important one because it talks about limits being put on the carrier's liability for loss, damage, or delay of goods, including fragile or perishable goods. 2.2.2.2 talks about claims restrictions, including time periods within which shippers or consignee must file a claim or bring an action against the carrier. 2.2.2.4 rules about the carrier's right to refuse to carry air cargo. And on we go. Once again, the bottom line here is that the U.S. importer understands that limited liability by the carrier and their agents means just that. And it comes down to, regardless of SDRs, special drawing rights, or whatever they want to call them, it comes down to a per kilo unit of measure, and the value that a U.S. importer is going to get is around $20 a kilo. The moral of the story being that the U.S. importer should consider additional insurance on top of what meager coverage the terms and conditions of a house airway bill offer. Let's switch gears, thank goodness, away from the reverse side of a house airway bill and its terms and conditions to talk about the master airway bill, something we mentioned when we were defining different documents. Let's go into a little bit more detail now. When tendering cargo to an airline, the forwarder must account for each individual house bill as well as the total pieces in weight of the entire consolidation. Every shipment, every U.S. importer is going to have their ticket to ride, their house airway bill. Now, in the forwarder relationship with the airline, the forwarder has to account for the entire consolidation, pieces, weight, the charge they pay to the airline. All of that has to be captured, and is captured on a document called the Master Airway Bill, the MAWB. First sub-bullet, the Master Airway Bill is the document that forwarders generate to provide details to the carrier on the entire consol. We just said that. Total pieces, weight, chargeable weight as well, and other details. The forwarder must also present a cargo manifest to the airline that itemizes the consolidation by house bill, shipper consignee, pieces and weight, etc. This is documentation between the forwarder and the airline. It's operational documentation, but also financial documentation. You'll recall that when we talked about IATA and the settlement mechanisms, the accounting mechanisms that they offer between forwarders and airlines, this is the document that drives the financial aspect of the forwarder-carrier relationship. Couple of quick differences here, and we'll see it in the larger version of the Master Airway Bill. But the Master Bill shows the air freight forwarder as the shipper. That makes sense. On the house bills, it's the individual supplier overseas that's shown as the shipper. For purposes of dealing with the airlines, the forwarder at origin is shown as the shipper, and the consignee is the forwarder's destination office or agent. The master links all shippers to the consolidation through the 11-digit Master Airway Bill number and the individual house bill numbers. These are two very important reference numbers that forwarders, customs brokers, airlines, customs entities, and certainly the importer need to be aware of on a per-shipment basis. As an example, for customs clearance, the airway bill number has to appear in the entry. Sub-bullet, first three digits of the master bill are the airline's numeric prefix, and the remaining numbers identify the specific master airway bill. We said this before. Every airline has a three-digit prefix. The master bill also serves as the accounting link between the carrier and the forwarder. We just said that a few minutes ago. This is the same exact rendition that we saw previously for a house bill. The only difference is it can also be used for a master bill. Some of the bigger differences. We already said the shipper field is the name and address of the freight forwarder at origin. The consignee field is that origin forwarder's office at destination or the name and address of their agent at destination. A forwarder at LAX, a forwarder at Orlando Airport. Getting down into the body of the Master Airway Bill, it's the total number of pieces, the total weight, the total chargeable weight, the rate negotiated between the forwarder and the airline, and then the summation of all of the charges. This document is almost never seen, at least it shouldn't be seen, by an importer. It's between the forwarder and the airline. Of course, the U.S. importer's house airway bill or airway bills are a part of the master, but they are two separate documents used for two different purposes. That takes us to the end of this section. When we come back, we will talk about different types of air freight consolidations.